The summer comes to an end, with much work in the fields to be done. Yet I must stop and pause a moment and put down my thoughts. I was in the village earlier picking up supplies when I was almost knocked off my feet by the ringing of the church bell. When I went inside to inquire as to what was happening, I was given news that shocked and appalled me as with the news of the passing of a close relative. Our king, our great bully Henry, was dead at the age of 36, leaving his beautiful bride and a newborn baby to mourn. As news spread throughout the town, people gathered in groups. Women cried, men fretted about the future, and of course, many of them came to me. Knowing as I did that I had indeed been with the king at Agincourt, and had been part of that miraculous battle a mere 7 years ago. I was happy to share the old stories again, even at such a sad occasion. But one part I have always kept to myself. The fact that I had met and talked with our late king the night before the battle. Of course, I found out only later that it was he. Imagine! But I can tell you this. That morning on the field in France, there was not one of us that would not have given our lives for him. Now that he's gone, perhaps it's time to tell. That night before the battle, Brother Bates and I were sitting around a campfire, eating what we knew for certain was our last meal. Now, I'm no politician or courtier, but the folks here raised me with the fear of God and simple common sense. I wasn't trying to hurt our morale, but I do know right from wrong. And I must admit, even after our success, that I was never sure exactly what we were fighting for. No Frenchman had ever done me or mine any harm. Why was I about to give up my life? We were told that the king's cause was, to use their word, just. Now, I am no saint, as those here will confirm, but I do think about my mortal soul. All I can remember saying was that the king's cause had better be a just one, or when I came to answer before St. Peter, the killing and the violence I was to commit the next day would be on the king's soul, not mine. Out of nowhere, a soldier whose face was hidden by a cloak came up from behind, and started arguing with me that as a loyal subject I had no right to second-guess the king. I don't know whether it was anger, or fear, or the thought of never seeing my family again, but I could not let it go. It got to the point where we exchanged gloves and challenged each other to a duel on the field of honor, should we both survive what was to come. I barely slept that night, none of us did. As the morning broke, we could see that we were vastly outmanned. The weather was poor, and spirits were at their lowest. But you all know what happened next. Our king gave a speech, the likes of which I had never heard before. He called us a band of brothers. I knew it wasn't truly so, but for that day I did feel indeed as though he was my brother. Of course, it was not his speech that won us a victory that day. The French were not ready for the longbow, and the archers rained death upon them before they even realized what was going on. The mud also saved us. I'd guess as many Frenchmen drowned in the mire in their heavy armor as were killed in actual combat. The tide really turned when a troop of French snuck behind us and destroyed our equipment, killing those poor unarmed boys who were guarding it in the process. It raised our anger to a fever pitch, and we redoubled our efforts against the enemy. I was wounded in the right thigh by a lance, and sustained a fairly severe wound to the shoulder from a French sword. I know I killed at least 3 enemy soldiers that day, and wounded several more. But the picture that will always stay in my mind is looking up at one point at the battle and seeing old Henry, face bloodied, fighting off 3 Frenchmen by his lonesome. Perhaps it was the hand of the Almighty that granted us a miracle that day, but I prefer to think it was our king's strength of spirit that made the difference. After the smoke cleared, as we watched the French bury their dead, I was appalled to discover that, without my knowing it, it was my own king who I had challenged to a duel the previous night. We reconciled like brothers, which, for that moment, we truly were. I still have his glove, of course, and I take it out and show it to my children every time I tell this story. Now that its original owner has passed, I am reminded about how prophetic his words were. We sailed home after Agincourt and landed at Southampton. I chose not to tarry in London. I came back straight here, my wounds quickly healed, and to all my friends and fellow villagers, I was a hero. To this day, I still can't pay for a pint at the pub. Someone or other insists on treating me. And, just as Henry promised, every 25th of October, everyone comes to my farm for a feast, and we all raise a glass or two to St. Crispin, to King Henry, and to all my brothers who fought and died beside me that day. This year, I fear the celebration will be a sadder one. Much is uncertain. Our nation is now ruled by an infant. Will England be able to hold on to that sacred ground for which so much noble blood was spilled? And on some mornings, when I wake up before everyone else and it's quiet, I also wonder about the future of my own soul, about whether I will be forgiven by the Almighty for all the lives I took, and all the widows and orphans I helped to create. The king is probably kneeling before the gates as I write this. I don't know if he will have to answer for all of it, but I do know one thing. If St. Peter asked my opinion on the matter, I'd say that our late King Henry deserves his place in heaven, for I have never seen a man before or since that was his equal. For God, Harry, and St. George indeed, and forever!